Everybody says compounding only works with real money behind it, and they are right. Put $1,000 in the market at a 7% return. That is roughly what American stocks have delivered after inflation over the long run. It earns you $70 in the first year, $5.83 a month, a coffee and a half. 10 years of patience turns that into about $11 a month of growth. Compounding on $1,000 is a rounding error, and anybody promising that person a transformed life is selling something. Now take the identical person at the identical 7% and change one thing. They add $250 a month, which is the amount people are routinely told is too small to bother with. In year 30, the market hands them $18,300, not the balance. That is what the market added in a single year, on top of everything they put in, a coffee and a half a month against $1,500 a month. Same person, same market, same rate of return. The difference is not that one of them had a big pile, it is that one of them built $250 at a time. The other one waited until he had enough for compounding to be worth it. I'm Tom. This channel is about real personal finance, the kind that works for normal people, instead of the kind that sells you something. No motivational fluff, no fantasy returns, no get rich quick. Just what the math actually does over time. If that is what you want, hit subscribe. Here is the sentence that gets people, and it sounds like wisdom because it is half true. Compounding needs a large sum of money. That is an argument about the size of your balance. It is not an argument about compounding, and somewhere along the way the two got welded together. The engine runs the same at every size. What changes is what its output can buy. $10,000 invested throws off about $58 a month. That is a phone bill. At $50,000, it is $292 a month, which covers the weekly groceries. At $100,000, $583 a month, a car payment produced by money you never touched. At $300,000, $1,750 a month. That is a mortgage payment. At $500,000, $2,900 a month, which for a lot of households is an entire month of living. Same 7% the whole way up. So when somebody says compounding needs a large sum, what they mean is that the output they want needs a large sum. True and completely different. The pile is the thing you build. Compounding is what builds it. Waiting until you have the pile before you start is like refusing to plant until you have a tree. And that is not a rhetorical point. The people who tell you compounding needs real money are usually describing their own account. Honestly, from a position 20 years down the road, they are not lying. They are just answering a different question than the one you asked. So what actually determines whether a small amount turns into a large one? I priced every candidate against the same baseline, which is $250 a month held for 30 years. The baseline result is $283,000, of which the person contributed $90,000. Here are the 5 things that matter, in order of what each is worth. Number 1. Do not cash out when you change jobs. Take that same saver and have them empty the account once, at year 15, then restart and contribute faithfully for the remaining 15 years. They finish with $75,000 instead of $283,000. That single decision cost $208,000. 73% of everything the plan would have produced from one afternoon of paperwork. And this is not a hypothetical failure mode. Vanguard studies nearly 5 million American retirement savers every year, and roughly a third of participants cash out their account when they leave a job. Think about how that actually happens. Nobody sits down and decides to destroy their retirement. A job ends. A letter arrives asking what to do with the balance, and one of the boxes says pay it out. The amount is a few $1,000s, which does not feel like a retirement, and there is a car that needs fixing. That is the whole event. 15 minutes, a form, and a decision that felt small because the balance was small. It is the most expensive thing on this list by a wide margin. It is also the easiest to avoid, because avoiding it means doing nothing at all. You move the account to an ordinary retirement account at a low-cost broker, and then you forget about it on purpose. Worth noticing what the ranking is telling you here. The single most valuable financial decision available to a person saving $250 a month is a decision not to do something. You roll the account over and you leave it alone. There is a version of this that is worse than cashing out, and it is more common than people admit. The account gets left behind. Not emptied, just forgotten. It sits at a former employer in whatever fund the plan defaulted to, often paying an administrative fee. Nobody looks at it for 15 years. That is not as expensive as cashing out. It is expensive enough. Say the plan charges 1/3% in administration and the default fund charges another half. Together, that is most of a full percentage point. Repriced a 1% drag at $46,000 over 30 years. That is what a forgotten account can quietly cost. Number 2, take the entire employer match. Many employers add money when you add money. The common arrangement is 50 cents for every dollar you contribute, up to some percentage of your pay. Run that same $250 a month with a 50% match, so $375 goes in instead. 30 years later, the balance is $425,000 instead of $283. $142,000 from money you did not earn and did not save. This is the one item on the list that pays before the market does anything at all. A 50% return on the day of the deposit guaranteed. And it is the strongest possible answer to the idea that small contributions do not matter. $250 a month is exactly the size where the match is most valuable relative to what you can afford. One more thing about the match, because there is a common reason people skip it. A lot of plans require you to stay a certain number of years before the employer's contributions are fully yours. People hear that and conclude the match is not real, so they do not bother. Your own contributions are always yours immediately in every plan. It is only the employer's portion that can carry a waiting period, and most of those periods are short. So the worst case is that you contribute, leave early, and keep every dollar you put in plus whatever it grew to. That is not a reason to decline a 50% return. Number 3, start before you feel ready. Take 5 years off the front of that same plan, same contribution, same return, just started at 30 instead of 35. The difference is $131,000. Notice what that number is. It is not the extra $15,000 contributed during those 5 years. It is that plus everything those early dollars earned across the whole remaining stretch. And here is the part that connects directly to the opening. Those first 5 years are the ones that feel most pointless. Year 1 produces $18 a month of growth, year 3 produces about $60. They feel like nothing while you are living through them, and they are worth $131,000 at the end. This is the part that makes people quit, and it is worth naming plainly. You will spend the first several years doing something that produces no visible evidence it is working. The account goes up because you put money in it, not because anything is happening. And 1 year you look and the market added more than you did, and it never goes back the other way again. That is why waiting until you have a respectable amount is the most expensive item in this entire video. The waiting costs more than most of the optimizing ever could. Before the last 2, notice something about the first 3. Every one of them is a decision you make once and then never revisit. You roll the account over once, set the contribution rate once, and start once. The 2 remaining items work differently, and that is why they end up smaller. Number 4. Let the contribution rise with your income. Hold that $250 a month flat for 30 years, and you get $283,000. Raise it by 3% a year, which roughly tracks a normal cost of living increase, and you get $389,000, $105,000, and this one has a property none of the others have. It does not require you to find any money. You are not squeezing anything out of a budget that has no room in it. You are routing the next raise instead of absorbing it. The $250 becomes $258 the following year, then $258 the following year, then $265. Nobody notices $8. 30 years of nobody noticing is worth 6 figures. The reason this one worse is that it never competes with anything. Every other savings decision asks you to give something up today. This one asks you to not start spending money you have not received yet, which is a much easier thing to agree to. Number 5. Do not pay 1% a year. An advisor charging 1% of your balance, or an expensive fund with the cost buried inside it, drops your 7% return to 6%. Over 30 years on the same contributions, that is $46,000. I put this last deliberately because it is the smallest of the 5. But look at the size of it anyway. There is a common piece of advice that goes, do not worry about fees until you have real money. $46,000 is what that advice costs a person contributing $250 a month. It is 16% of everything they built, so the ranking, plainly. Not cashing out is worth $208,000. The match is worth $142. Starting 5 years earlier, $131. raising the contribution with your income 105, avoiding a 1% fee 46. Now look at what those 5 have in common, because it is the real answer to the question in the title. Not one of them requires a large sum of money. Rolling over an old account costs nothing. Neither does the form that captures a match. Starting earlier asks only that you begin with a number you find embarrassing. Routing a raise spends money you do not have yet. And moving to a cheap index fund is free. 5 decisions, and none of them requires money you do not have. Compare that to what people actually spend their attention on. Which fund, what day of the month, whether to wait for a better entry point, whether the market is expensive right now. Every one of those questions is downstream of the 5 above, and every one of them is worth a fraction as much. None of them requires money you do not have. They require money you do have to be handled a specific way. That is what the big pile theory gets backwards. People treat the pile as the entry requirement when it is the output. The entry requirement is a habit and 5 decisions, and the pile is what those produce. One more number before the caveats, because the 5 items are not alternatives, they stack. Take the same person doing all of them. $250 a month with a 50% match, raised 3% a year in the low-cost fund. Started 5 years earlier and never cashed out. 35 years later, they have $884,000. The baseline was $283,000. Doing all 5 turns the same monthly habit into 3 times as much money. In retirement income terms, that is the difference between $945 a month and $2,949. Same $250 a month at the start. Same market, 5 decisions. Now the honest half, because a video that stops here would leave you with the wrong impression. The output from a small amount really is small, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. $250 a month for 30 years produces $283,000. The standard guideline says you can withdraw about 4% a year. That comes to about $944 a month of retirement income. That is real money, and it is not a retirement. It is a meaningful piece of one, sitting alongside Social Security and whatever else you build. Anyone telling you that $250 a month solves retirement is doing what the big pile people do. From the other direction, both are picking the convenient half. The second honest point is about time, because everything above assumes 30 years. If you are 25, this video is a straightforward instruction manual. If you are 55 with 10 years of runway, the ranking shifts hard. That same $250 a month over 10 years produces about $41,000. The contribution now matters far more than any of the optimizing, because there is not enough time left for the optimizing to compound. The 5 things do not change, their weights do. The third is that 7% is a long-run average, not a schedule. I ran every 10-year stretch in the last century of American market returns. 4 of 91 finished negative, and 9 came in under 3% a year. A bad decade landing on your first 10 years pushes everything back, and nothing you do prevents that. So here is what I would actually do with this. If you have an old retirement account sitting in a former employer, deal with it this week. And that is item 1. It is worth more than the other 4, and it takes an afternoon. Then find out what your employer matches and contribute at least enough to collect all of it. The number is in your plan documents, and if you cannot find it, one call to Human Resources settles it in 5 minutes. That is item 2, and it is free money you are currently declining. Then start at whatever number is available this month rather than the number you hope to reach next year. If the amount embarrasses you, that is the correct amount. Embarrassment is not a financial category. I mean that literally. So here's what the small numbers actually produce over 30 years. $25 a month builds about $28,000. $50 a month builds $57,000. $100 a month builds $113,000. None of those is a retirement. Everyone is a real number that would not otherwise exist. And everyone started at an amount somebody would have called pointless. $25 a month is a real answer. The point is not the amount. The point is that the engine cannot run on a balance that does not exist. Then set a reminder for whenever you next get a raise and route part of it before you get used to the larger paycheck. 3% of it is enough, and you will not feel the difference in your account the following month. And put it somewhere that charges you almost nothing. Today that means a broad index fund at a major low-cost broker. The fee on $10,000 there runs a couple of dollars a year. Go back to that $1,000 from the opening for a second. At 7%, it earns $70 in the first year, and that is genuinely a rounding error. Nothing I have shown you changes that. What changes is what happens next. Add $250 a month to it, and by year 12, the market is putting in more than you are. By year 30, it is adding $18,000 a year against your 3. The $1,000 was never going to do it alone. It was never supposed to. It was the thing that let the engine start. Compounding never needed a big pile. What it needs is a balance that exists, that keeps growing, and that nobody empties out halfway through. Everything in this video is a version of one of those 3. If this was worth your time, hit subscribe. I will see you in the next one.